Thank you everyone for coming to, what a month are we in now? June, to June's swag. First one for a while. And delighted to have Andrew Beanie with us today. I'm sure most of you know Andrew, but for those who don't, I'm not going to butcher an intro for you, Andrew. I'll let you do that in a second when you present. I've known Andrew for a long while, and when we worked together, how many years ago is that now? Like 8, 9 years ago?
Yeah, 7, 8, something like that.
We used to have some good chats about product ownership and whatnot. So I'm sure Andrew will have some good insight for the group today. Just wanted to welcome Shelby to the organizing committee of SWAG, bringing in some much needed additional diversity to the group, which is always nice. And I'm sure Shelby's been tasked to organize the meetup for August. So I think you can reserve judgment on her inclusion in the group until after that event. Obviously, we're still trying to find out really what's working well for the group during these times. I know people are exhausted with being on Zoom all the time, and it's leading to some lower attendance numbers than we would like. But the general feeling from those who were coming was keep going. We'll keep recording them. We'll stick them on YouTube, and hopefully we can all get some value out of them. The next meetup in July is we're going to partner with the event that the DVLA are hosting, the Agile on the Patio event. All the details are on our meetup page. It's a separate registration, but we've got a link off to there. So it's a whole day event, a bit of a mini conference type thing. So lots of stuff going on. So if you're interested in that, go and have a look on the meetup page. And yeah, I'm sure Ash can talk about that once we get to the end of the session today. Without further ado then, Andrew, I will hand over to you. So you should be able to share and do whatever you need to.
Marvelous.
So
thank you.
Yeah, over to you.
All right, let's see if this works. Okay, can everybody see? Oh, it's cliche number one. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Marvel.
Take it off the bingo cards. You're not on mute, so I won't have to say that.
All right. So a little bit of a talk, a little bit of a discussion item really for this session, I thought. I wanted to look at enterprise agile transformation. I've been looking at it for the last few months, and there's a question been at the sort of front of mind for a little while, is when you get into an enterprise agile transformation, where should you start? Specifically, should you really start with culture? And I'll get into why that question is formed in a little while. Just a little bit about me, managing consultant at Box UK, so digital agency in Cardiff. It's been going since 1998. I'm heading up professional services, so we're helping people with digital transformations, agile transformations, product discoveries, and general sort of process improvement kind of things. So you can reach me through those channels: LinkedIn, Twitter. Not really on Twitter that much. Or Instagram. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about agile transformation. I am absolutely certain that everybody in the room knows quite a lot about agile transformation, but I'm just going to put a few doodles up on the screen just to sort of talk around it and get to a sort of a common place. And they are doodles, sorry. If we look at a picture of an enterprise, and there's dozens and dozens of ways you can draw an enterprise, but if you look at this example, you've got a few layers to the enterprise, and bear in mind this is a sort of a pre-agile enterprise, so it's kind of a conventional setup. So you'd have the sort of the team level, and maybe the sort of the functional teams, and they'd come together for projects, and you'd have people working at that project level, working all the way up through programs and portfolios to this sort of enterprise and business level of the organization. You'll have other people involved, so you'll have investors looking at the business at that enterprise and sort of business level, that C-suite level. You'll have users, and they'll be taking the delivery of whatever it is you're doing, and that will cover outputs from the sort of the project level, the team level, possibly the program level, maybe even up to portfolio. The boundaries here aren't necessarily that important. And you'll have other stakeholders like partners and regulators, and they'll be sort of looking across the organization. And you'll have different activities at different levels. So you'll have, for the most part, strategy definition at that sort of top layer, working its way down. Leadership and governance, again, at those sort of top layers, but working their way down. And delivery, starting sort of, again, at this sort of team and project level, and sort of working its way up. So that's kind of pre-agile, and a lot of agile change and agile transformations that I've seen, and freely admit that there's going to be other points of view, but just from what I've seen, a lot of it starts from the bottom up. So teams realize that they need to change. There's something not quite right. They're not delivering on time, or they're not being necessarily that efficient, and that sort of can lead to what I'm calling a local transformation, sort of a local change, local process improvement, that kind of thing. And if that works well, that could, work its way up through the organization. People see a bit of success and maybe go, okay, let's do more of this. Getting into these sort of upper echelons, right? Ultimately, perhaps scaling to that enterprise level. Now, I'm not claiming for 1 minute that that's how all enterprise transformations start or end, but that's one route to it. It's possible you could have top-down agile change where you have people in that C-suite or that sort of leadership level looking at the business and going, yeah, we're not performing as we should be. We need to make a change. We need to be more innovative or more responsive. And then there's some sort of leadership initiative to drive a change. So it can, the point being that it can look a lot of different ways depending on the organization, depending on the circumstances. And no doubt you'll have seen things like this, Agile Transformation Framework, and there's lots of them around. I've just picked on one from McKinsey because I'm going to be talking a little bit about them in a few minutes. And you can see that there's different, again, different layers to it, different aspects of that transformation. McKinsey talk about people, processes, structure, and technology. I'm sure there's others that that you could think of. And when we're talking about culture, in McKinsey's language, culture is firmly in this sort of people section here. You could make an argument that actually culture sits above all of this. And again, we can talk about that a little bit later. But for any particular framework, culture is going to have a position somewhere. How does that look if you superimpose it onto a pre-agile enterprise? It could look something like that. And again, oops, sorry. You've got the sort of the different strands covering the different layers of the business. I'm just going to branch off quickly into change management because I think this is always worth talking about, and it's always worth bearing in mind, considering what we're going to be talking about a little bit later on. If you want to make change stick, there's a lot of things that you've got to do. However you look at the change, whatever change it is you want to make, if you want to make it stick, there's certain things that you have to address. We use something called the Lippitt Knoster change model as a sort of a checklist or a sort of a guide. And I'm guessing people have seen something like this before and really not seen a change model like this. No, okay. I mean, what this states is that you've got to have certain things in place just to have a chance of a change sticking and being sustainable. So, for example, if you don't have a vision of what that change needs to be, you're going to get confusion in the organization. If you don't have a shared understanding and a consensus of what it means, you might get sabotage. A lack of skills might lead to anxiety in the staff. A lack of resources and time in particular will lead to frustration. So if you ask people to change while they're doing their day job and you don't give them enough time to make that change, then people get frustrated. Personal incentives is always huge, as I'm sure you'll appreciate. Everybody undergoing a change will at some point ask, well, what's in it for me? And you've got to be able to answer that question. And if you don't have some sort of plan, some sort of clear next steps, then you'll just end up not really going anywhere fast and be on that sort of treadmill. So when we think about where we start and what we do next in a transformation, I always sort of look back to this change model aspect and sort of use that as a checklist and come back to it. So if we think about culture in a business, I'm just sort of getting my sort of prelims in first, really. Again, there's dozens and dozens of definitions of what culture is in a business. I've just picked out a few relatively straightforward ones. So you can talk about company culture being the shared values, characteristics, behaviors, attitudes. Some will go on a little bit wider and say it includes policies and procedures and things like that. But to sort of sum it up in one word, that sort of personality of an organization is a nice descriptor, I think. And as we've seen, it usually, for the most part, ends up in that sort of people strand of that transformation framework. So the question of the session is do you want to start an enterprise agile transformation with culture? Before we get into that, I mean, has anybody got any sort of questions or comments of what I said, or am I don't think I've been controversial at all, but if anybody's got anything to add or say, then please do. No, we're good. Okay. All right. So again, this has been something I've been pondering for a little while, and I've come across McKinsey in particular made a case to start your enterprise agile transformation with culture, and the case was made mostly or originally from a McKinsey conference in 2018, and it was gathering the great and the good from digital native organizations, from established organizations, and talking a lot about transformation, what makes a good transformation, how you do it. It was still is a live subject among many organizations, and culture came up a lot. You know, so I've picked out a few examples. Goldman Sachs, their execs said they wanted to move into these new markets, so they needed that sort of culture of exploration, innovation, risk taking. Siemens wanted an ownership culture to encourage innovation. ESPN, I thought was an interesting one. I didn't think I'd see them at a McKinsey conference, but they said, well, look, all the innovation that we do is linked to our purpose as an organization. We want to tell great stories, and we want to connect with sports fans. So we're going to innovate to be able to be at the front of doing that. Almost a sort of a user-centric element to that. But for the most part, none of that struck me as being particularly weird or alien. They were all cultural elements that you'd recognize in an agile transformation. And the bottom line of that is that the conclusion that McKinsey came to is that it was the most discussed learning at that conference and subsequently. The key to any sort of reinvention is culture. And the conclusion again was that that's because culture is kind of the most difficult thing to change. So when you go in and you sort of undergo a transformation, you've got these things to look at, and McKinsey were advocating we'll start with the most difficult thing. You know, we know it's important, but it's also the most difficult to start there. And you could potentially make a case for that. But there's other cases to be made as well for starting somewhere else. And I looked to a company called Leading Agile. I don't know if you've come across them. And I like quite a lot of what they do, actually. It was a blog post this month, which was very convenient. It sort of came out a couple of weeks after we'd agreed this session with James. But that blog post sort of summarized quite a lot of work that they'd been doing over the previous few years as well. And their question was, okay, if you address culture first, you can be agile, and that's good. Or do you want to put practices in place to help delivery and do agile? And this again assumed a sort of a waterfall starting point with, sort of a lot of old school waterfall traits. But then it sort of made an argument of, well, let's start somewhere else other than culture. What happens if you just start with practices? And the conclusion there was, well, okay, you'll have people knowing that they need to split work into iterations, and knowing that they need to do a retrospective at the end of it, and knowing that they need to do sprint planning. They may know what to do, but they may not know the depth of why they should be doing it, or have the behaviors to support doing it really well. And the conclusion that was, well, when you take this back into your home teams in your organization, you might not be able to sustain it. You might not have the structure around that to support that approach. So, okay, address practices first, and then address culture. Have a go at that, and try and get the organization to think more adaptively and be more constructive, and sort of have these sort of short feedback loops and all of that sort of stuff. And the line there was, I think, a little bit cynical on it. Maybe people will pick up the practices. Hopefully, they'll have enough time to practice all of this sort of stuff. But there was a sort of a kind of a strength of feeling within Leading Agile that culture may not be the place to start. You'll be able to show people what good looks like, but when they come to try it in practice, they won't have the things set up around them to be able to really do what they've been shown, or what they've learnt, and then it'll be really hard to make that change stick. And things will just fizzle out, and that's really not what you want from that sort of transformation. And I want to get your opinions on this now. So I'd like to know a little bit about what you think of that. And I've set up, I'm sorry if you've seen Miro boards all day, but I've set up another Miro board. I will put the link in the chat. Just stop my screen sharing so I can access the chat. And go back to my screen. So what I'd like to do, and we'll spend a few minutes on this, in kind of the style of a retrospective. What I'd like you to do is just to consider where you might start in an agile enterprise agile transformation, making your own case, and maybe reflecting your own experience on where you have started before, where you would like to start, and just sort of put a few post-its down on each area of the board. I've got the board split into 4 areas. An area for starting with culture, and if you can make a case for starting with culture, then let's put a few points down there. Starting with structures is another alternative. Starting with practices or processes, we've just talked about, or starting with technology or data and some of the other layers. So I'd like to put just a few minutes on the clock, just to get some of your thoughts as to where you might start, where you might want to start, where you have started, and some of your experiences on that. How does everyone feel about that? All right. I'll put 2 minutes to start, and then we'll go through those. We'll have a look at what people have thought after those 2 minutes are up. So I'll start the timer on the Miro board now. All right, so we've had a couple of minutes. Does anybody want another minute, another 30 seconds, or is everyone happy with where they are? Sorry, because I'm sharing my screen, I can only see a few faces, but okay. If we are happy, then let's dive in. I'm going to start with this discussion with starting with technology and data, and I'm kind of glad we didn't have a lot of people starting with that, because I'm not sure that's really the right place to start. And the single comment there, I think, bears it out, that tech can give people the wrong reliance. You know, and from my point of view, I think the transformations are very rarely about tech. It's much more in other areas. So I'm kind of glad that worked out. And if we look at some of the discussion points about starting with culture and reasons to start with culture, transparency and openness, and establishing the behaviors you want to change. I think those are really, really important points. It's a journey. I mean, that's true. And I think you know, whoever owns the post-its as well, just to sort of, you know, jump in to discuss. But that being a journey, that sounds like a sort of a fairly long-term thing. So is that part of the thinking, that you want to start the long tail thing early?
Oh, I don't think it's about starting it early, but it's certainly it's taking everybody on that journey. Yeah. Otherwise, people, you know, go through that fear factor, you know, curve, and, you know, put walls up, and then it becomes harder to coach them once they have that fear and that wall is up. So it's about, and that ties into my other post-it note, which you just said, which is openness and transparency, right? Just be collectively honest about what's happening, communicate that out. Okay, you don't need to go to certain things, you don't need to go nuts and bolts, but you certainly need to take them on a journey. And I think if you take people on a journey, they're then more open to the ideas that you are trying to implement, or buy into something that you're trying to improve with inside the organization.
Yeah, no, that's good. There's a small one here. Culture is vital. However, how can you need an example such as a small team within the org? I'm not sure I'm following that one. Sorry, I don't.
Yeah, sorry, that's me. I think I've miswritten that. But basically what I was trying to explain there was, although culture is vital, and it is a good place to start, from personal experience, I found that you need to have an example, a prototype, to pretty much kickstart things. So you do need to get some structure and some examples in there first to get that buy-in from the wider organization. If you try and turn up with a story, just saying this thing is great, do this, well, in my opinion, it might not be the best way to approach it.
It's establishing a body of evidence for the change, isn't it? I guess.
Much,
yeah. No, that's a really good point. Just move up to the top right here. So the orgs that start here typically focus on artifacts rather than underlying assumptions. So yeah, can the owner of that post-it expand on that?
Yeah, that was me. So just looking at, like, you know, Sheen's model with regards to culture and how culture gets impacted. You know, the very top of that pyramid are the artifacts that organizations are really good at doing. So they're really good at saying, we're going to be agile, we're going to be DevOps, we're going to do all this stuff, assuming that that's going to impact the culture. Like, I swear a lot of companies think that if they just come to the table and say, we're going to implement Scrum, they expect the culture to magically change based on that. And actually what they should be focusing on is ultimately changing the behaviors that ultimately drive those underlying assumptions, also known as the way we do things here, cultural points. So I think the problem with calling out culture explicitly as a starting point is that team organizations will always focus on the stuff that is above the sea level, which typically are the artifacts, the easiest things to influence, but the things that have the or things that are least likely to actually have any sort of durability of change.
And there's an element there of I guess being trying to draw an analogy with might be a dodgy analogy, elite sports stars. They say, you know, don't focus on the output, focus on how you get there, and focus on you know, on that journey. So yeah, I think I can draw that analogy. Okay, I think I got away with it. And yeah, so coming down here now, I think there's a few post-its that are getting over to sort of a bit of a crossover with practices and processes, and sort of the one slightly at a higher level with those. Need to consider the different levels in the organization too. Executives and managers have different perceptions to teams. I agree with that. That's something I'm going to talk a little bit about later. But yeah, do you want to say a few words about that? Whoever owns that post-it. No, okay. And then we've got the two that are sort of crossing over. So we'll begin with a combination of culture and practices. Don't see why it would be a binary choice. That's a very good point. It doesn't necessarily have to be a binary choice. And starting with practices is a good place, but with experienced and empowered people with air support from senior leaders trying to address culture change. Agile transformation stand the best chance of success when top down and bottom up. So that sounds as though actually, yes, we've taken this as a bit of a thought experiment and a bit of a, you know, do you start with one thing, and practically and pragmatically you'd want to do a few things at the same time. And yes, I think that's true. There is a question of what is the first thing that you do, I guess, but yeah, I think that's the sort of the pragmatic way forward. If we move into practices and processes, and this I think is, you know, there's a few cases for starting here. So start here first with the basics, so you have a platform to work off and use when gaining buy-in. And I think that's kind of related to what we saw in the culture section, with the need for a prototype and the need for evidence, and using it as a sort of a tool to drive change. I guess is there have I missed anything on that post-it?
I think you can guess it both from the same person. So yeah, the sort of idea I've had from this is a previous experience again with the you get a team, you pretty much just try and get them operating in the correct way to start with, get the processes, the basics done, and you let the proof is in the pudding. Then I suppose you start to see the productivity, and you gain buy-in off that. Then by the fact that the work is improved, everything's better just from that little bit to start with.
And that's kind of taking the sort of the late adopters and other people in the organization with you then, isn't it, I guess? Okay, another one, need to visualize and measure where you are before you start. So the measurement thing is interesting, because I think we can measure practices, we can measure processes, we can measure outcomes. I find it difficult to measure culture. I don't know if anybody else has cracked that or not, but I find it a little bit difficult. What's everyone's thoughts on measuring?
Yeah, I think you could, some of them could just be vanity metrics, right? Are you happy this change is happening? Do you feel included? Yes, no. They don't really give you some context and don't really go deep enough for you to understand whether something has been impactful or not, right? Yeah. For me, I wouldn't measure culture.
I think also setting that. Sorry to dive in. I think it's also setting the boundaries of where you're trying to change culture. So if you're trying to change culture in an organization that's got 6,000 people, good luck to you. But if you're trying to change culture within a department of that and then look to expand that out, I think that you stand a much better chance.
Yeah, and that's you wouldn't try 6,000 in one go, but but you do need to start somewhere, and that's that's the balance, isn't it? Yeah, and I listened to a podcast a few weeks ago. I can't remember the guy's name, but the author of the book Testing Business Ideas. Have you come across that? I think I've got a copy actually. Testing Business Ideas by can't find the name. David J. Bland. Don't know if you come across that, but so that's that. I mean, that's quite a famous, or getting quite a famous book now about how you innovate and you know, how you expand and prove new ideas for the least possible risk and possible cost and all of that sort of stuff. And he talked about the sort of the hierarchy of evidence. So, you know, understanding what people say is okay evidence. Understanding what they do is much better evidence. So when it comes to measuring culture, as Shelby said, if you just go on what people say, okay, you've got some sort of measure, but how reliable is it? But if you're able to figure out how to measure what they do, then that's likely to be a stronger piece of evidence. Just finishing up here. So training everyone in the practices and frameworks. So I'm interpreting that as a kind of I like a bottom-up approach for this, where you show people what they're doing, and then you get the chance to show the behaviors by example or by illustration. Is that fair? Okay. And this is an interesting one. So I've seen organizations try to start changing culture, ends up being a forced endeavor. Practices and values identity has worked better as people are more bought in, and culture naturally appears last. I intuitively that resonates with me. As a sort of thing of, well, if you want to encourage change, you've got to show people how to change. You've got to give them the framework in which they can make that change. But yeah, I do wonder whether there's a piece about, well, you have to introduce the change first. You have to show people where they've got to get to as well. I don't know. I don't know if I'm missing something on that post-it or not.
Which one? Sorry, I wasn't paying attention. I was looking at the. I was trying to read the one that was over in the corner. Which one were you reading? Okay. The blue one. Oh, the blue one's not mine. Yeah. The blue one's not mine. That's fine.
To my mind, they go in lockstep, Andrew. They almost feed off each other. So you can bring some practices in. People see the benefit of those practices and start to adopt it, and the culture starts to form around the practices that show value to people. And it's almost like they kind of do this.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
That's the lousiest dance I've ever done. So apologies.
There's a couple in the start with structure piece, which I want to move on to. So structure gives people the framework to practice in, and yeah, I can interpret that fairly straightforwardly. But does the owner want to expand on that a little bit?
Yes, that was me. I've had experience where it's a bit like some of the previous comments about setting up a kind of example team. So setting up a Scrum team and kind of saying, well, you're a Scrum team and we'll kind of support you in the way you want to work. And then using that as an example to show people how this team is now performing really well as an empowered team, and kind of growing it from there, rather than kind of enforcing a structure on everybody or enforcing a process on everybody. It kind of almost ring fences that team and says, well, you know, we've given you this team as a unit, and we'll give you the support to go in and work as you want. So it's kind of, it's not just the structure by itself. It does need support from some of the other boxes on the screen as well.
And the final one I'm going to talk about is a bit chicken and egg, and I think that's true, isn't it? And that's really what's driven the whole question of the session, because you've got to start somewhere. But okay, thanks for that. I'm going to add a couple of things to that, if I may. So if we go back to the deck and return to what Leading Agile said, it was quite interesting. Leading Agile started with structures, and it was quite interesting that there's only a couple of sort of mentions of structures in our discussion, on the basis and on the argument that if you have the organization and the team structure and the reporting structures and the hierarchies and all of that sort of stuff, if that's unsuitable, then it's going to be a lot harder for any sort of culture and any sort of practice to stick. And they acknowledged culture shift, very necessary, but insufficient. And installing new practices, necessary, but insufficient. But they argue neither of those are the places to start, which I found quite interesting. And it is tricky how they managed to get to that sort of quite definitive comment. But because I'm pretty much with you guys, I think, you know, you have to do this in a very sort of tight iteration of you do some structure, some practices, some culture, and see where you are and iterate around that. But it was quite a definitive statement, and the assertion that there needs to be an underlying structure that enables agile, and that it's I think these were my words, another dodgy analogy. The structure is the soil in which culture and practices take root. And I see where they're going with that, but I think it is an iterative piece. And as somebody else has mentioned about the different parts of the enterprise looking to do different things and looking to achieve different things. So if we go back to the structures that we were looking at, and where, again, pre-agile, where you're looking at you know, where your leadership and governance occurs and where your delivery occurs, they're not always in the same place. Even if you change a structure, and please don't shoot me for this representation of a structure, it's a very simplified cartoon version of something kind of similar to SAFe, but I didn't want to get too many feathers ruffled by going in detail. But you might have a much wider spread of leadership and governance across the layers and a much wider spread of delivery across the layers, and that's fine. But you might also find that people involved in the delivery, they might need greater emphasis on practices to start off with, because they need to deliver stuff. They can't necessarily just suspend what they're doing to learn something in full and then start, you know, restart again. And the leadership, people in leadership positions, they may need to have greater emphasis put on culture, because they may need to understand what the practices are generating for them, and understand the differences, and be able to handle that when they're taking those inputs and they're making those decisions. So in putting all of this together and in sort of thinking about it all, I've actually come around to this whole let's eat our own dog food kind of approach. We need to, an enterprise agile transformation needs to be user-centered. Why wouldn't we do it like this? Where the users are the various people in the organization. And if we take that approach, and it speaks to the iteration and the sort of the hand dance that we saw earlier, you know, I think it's all in the same space, that we need to understand. You know, we need to understand who the people are that we're asking to transform, what their needs and motivations are, what they need to deliver for the organization, what they're bringing to that organization, and how a transformation can support them. Like I said, the Leading Agile case, I think, is quite compelling with structures. McKinsey's got a great point about culture, but I think, you know, underpinning all of this, we need to understand who needs what and when, and possibly be a little bit sort of read and react when we get into an organization. the tricky thing about that is, and this is maybe a point of discussion for later. I've tried selling that into organizations that are pre-agile, and guess what? They wanted to know everything up front, what we were going to do, how we were going to do it. So it's a tricky sell. I think we're relatively settled on that's a good way to do things, but it can be a tricky sell. That's all from me. Thank you for your thoughts. I hope it didn't drag. I hope you enjoyed it. But yeah, any sort of questions or discussion now, that would be great.
Do you think we should be trying to sell, right? That whole thing of going into an organization to try to sell something to somebody, I get it. I'm not disagreeing with you. I do get it, because like as practitioners, we sell our wares. Like as a coach, you go in and say, you know, I can do this for you, and you sell yourself, right?
Yeah.
But do we actually need to be as agilists selling what the benefits are that hardly? You know, no disrespect to the big four, because you know, my opinion of the big four is never been very great. I've just seen them go into companies, you produce a PowerPoint pack that you can get off, I don't know, SlideShare, and charge £6,000 for it, and then it's the chaos behind the scenes that you then have to pick up and deal with. But I get selling, but I don't think it should be a hard sell, is what I'm trying to get across.
No, and I'm looking at very much from an agency perspective, and like I said, you know, head of professional services is in an agency, so I've got to get business in for that agency. So from that point of view, the sell is convincing people that we are the right choice to do the transformation, and I have found that the buyers, when they're in this position of not necessarily being fully agile, maybe being quite waterfall in some areas, you know, they're putting their own constraints on, they have their own expectations, but they also want to know, where are you going to start, and you know, what's your plan. And it's a tricky thing to say what you're actually going to do and what is probably the best thing to do, which is to go in, learn the organization and understand where the needs are, and then react to that. In those sort of pre-agile organizations, that doesn't always build confidence.
I really liked your last slide, Andrew. I thought that kind of user-centric idea of targeting maybe culture in one area and process in the other, depending on need, makes absolute sense to me. And that's kind of where I was coming from with my kind of bottom up and top down as well, right? You need support from the top to enable you to do stuff, but you also need buy-in from the grassroots to get there. And I think it kind of it's that user-centric thing is almost like applying Connev into an agile transformation, right? What we're dealing with is a complex system because it's made up of people, and it's an organization of people. So what do we do in there? Well, we probe and sense, right? And that's basically what it's give people what you think they need, and then check to see whether that's what they needed, right?
Absolutely.
I think that's absolutely bang on the money for me.
But I think this is where you need to, when an organization is looking to make a change like that, you need to have buy-in from the top, okay? And you know, to your point, Andrew, I think you need to persuade them. It's almost as if you need to sell them the future, the culture, the benefits of it before they'll buy into, you know, the approach and the investment to do that. And selling practices to teams, particularly in technology, is, you know, pretty easy sell these days, because most of them, if they're not doing it, are probably hating the way they work. But you know, as you said, Ashley, you need to be doing both at the same time. I think you need that executive sponsorship and the investment and the management support, and let the teams thrive in that. Otherwise, they fail if you come from either side independently. You know, my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Another concept I was reading about was the concept of culture bubbles. So almost like local cultures. So working in DVLA, like I said earlier, there's 6,000 people. There's no way in the world that we could possibly even try to attempt to change the whole of the culture, the whole of the organization, right? But what we can do is we can almost change our own our own little area and kind of try and push that out. And where we interface with people who don't necessarily have that same culture, almost create like APIs for how we deal with them.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess that's even more important than if you're looking at international organizations or organizations that, I don't know, recently acquired a business or recently merged or something like that. Then yeah, those kind of culture APIs, I think, yeah, that's a great way of putting it. All right. Well, if there's no more, thank you very much for your time and your attention and your energy and your participation. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I shall hand it back to James.
Thanks, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.